Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, I have a conversation with Chris Bowden from Refocus Creative. His desire is to create high-quality, authentic stories. His goal is not to push people away, but to draw them in through the stories that they see. Polished caricatures don't move us to transform, but seeing the truth demonstrated in characters we relate to. Join us as we enter into this conversation.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and today we're going a little off script, as it were. We're not talking specifically about a movie. There's going to be no clips here today. I'd like to welcome Chris into the studio, as it were, and say welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here. I'm doing okay. I can't complain.
Yeah,
I could complain, but I won't complain. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, we try to kick off the podcast on a light note, and
Yes.
we got focus on gratitude instead of griping.
I can tell you my problem starting with the letter A. Just kidding. No, I'm great. I'm happy to be here. I love doing stuff like this. I'm excited to chat with you, and I love talking about movies and entertainment. So
Yeah,
let's do it, man.
yeah, and so over the last several months, really, these opportunities have opened up for me to talk not just with people who love movies, who have a faith, who want to talk about story, but who are actually in the industry, making films, creating their own stories. And so that's kind of what we're doing and how we got connected. We got connected through a super fan of the show, supporter of the show, Sarah Daniels. Shout out to her. But the funny thing is, you don't actually know Sarah.
I don't. I know a friend of Sarah's. And so things like that have been happening, just weird connections and doors opening. So I don't have any control over it. I just go with the flow.
You just get this crazy email from someone you haven't met introducing you to another person you haven't met. And you're
In fact, I checked. I was asking Lee, who's the mutual friend. I was like, do you know this person? Because I'm always worried about like people follow me who I don't know, or bots and things like that, And so, who is this person? They also follow you. He's like, oh yeah, she's cool. So she got the clear. You're not a bot, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah. So you are located up in New Hampshire.
That's right.
Which is north of Boston, for anyone who's familiar with northeastern U.S.
I'm just from Boston.
Just say Boston.
Keep it simple. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like New York City. You're either from New York City or from the upstate.
Exactly.
Everything not in the city is upstate New York.
Yeah. I'm about 45 minutes north of Boston, so not far. I get there. It's a pretty accessible city. And I also live near a big city in New Hampshire called Manchester. They nickname Manch Vegas. It's not anything like Vegas.
Everything's getting the Vegas tag.
I know. They have a really cool board game store up there or a board game cafe that I sometimes frequent. And it's a pretty cool city. They have like a nice concert venue, and I every now and then, I'm not a city guy, but every now and then I'll pop in and see what's going on.
So a board game cafe, is that a place where you show up, you drink coffee, and they play board games that they have available?
Oh man, we should do a whole other podcast on this, but it's more. I mean, you show up. They've been popping up all over the place. They probably get a few in your region.
I'm sure.
You go. They have food, and you can order drinks. They have coffee. They have different mixed drinks, things like that. But you usually pay like a nominal fee to play board games all day.
Nice.
And you buy food. It's awesome, man. It's a really good time. If you're a big board gamer, then you'll love your local board game cafe.
So now, you used to be a board game developer, creator.
Yeah. And we talked earlier in the pre-show about one-man show, right? So I did all that. So I did create my own board game. I never pushed it anywhere. I tried getting it out there, but it didn't really go anywhere. But I did create my own game. I designed it. I developed it. I did a lot of the design, like the graphic design for it.
Wow.
And so I still do dabble in game creation and content creation for games. My set behind me is actually designed to be a board game video content studio. So I still want to go back to it someday. But life and other things have taken priority lately. So
yeah, you said your daughter's 4 or almost 4?
Almost 4.
Almost 4.
Yep.
So
just one daughter, but she's very determined to get her way all the time. So she's very strong-willed, which is a good thing, but it takes up a lot of time to raise her, which I'm very happy to do.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when you become a parent and when you get busy. And I mean, things like we're going to talk about, some projects today that I'm working on, I think. And so those have taken priority, which I'm excited about. And the gaming thing, I think I'm just happy with it being a hobby now. And I think before I was really obsessed with it becoming like a monetized thing. And it was rough for a while when it wasn't working out. So, but I'm in a better place now. So yeah, lots going on, man. Lots going on.
Yeah. You're that stage of life is definitely a reprioritization, or
for sure.
The opportunities there. Sometimes people don't choose to prioritize family and all that stuff. Yeah. And, but there's always going to be a comeuppance at some point where things are going to clash if, your schedule is not aligned with your values.
Absolutely.
Last question on the board game thing. What are some of your favorite board games?
Oh man,
I didn't say the favorite. I just said some of my. Okay, good. That's true. You didn't say my favorite. Are you familiar with different board game genres and things like that? Vaguely.
Okay. I love deck building games. One of my favorite games is called Clank. It's like a dungeon exploration, treasure hunting game where you build a deck of cards that are unique to you and you use them to advance yourself. I love Villainous, which is a Disney game where you play the villains, and my wife and I have all of them because we like to play head to head with different villains, and you can combine them. You can be like Maleficent versus Scar from Lion King, So it's pretty cool. I love that game too. So I'll play just about anything. I'm not big into heavy Euro strategy games too much, but I'll play them. I like really heavily. I think my imaginative way, I'm drawn to thematic games that are unique and different. So, yeah,
nice. My a couple years ago, my family got me Pandemic, the stretched out game. I can't remember the term for it.
The
legacy game. Yeah. And so we're about halfway through because they don't like playing it. And they're just I don't want to play it.
If you like legacy games, you got to check out Clank Legacy. Yeah. Clank was one I mentioned, but Legacy is their version of the legacy game. And it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And so it's people are sometimes cautious or hesitant about playing the legacy games because you play it once.
Yeah.
And I read about playing Risk. And people are like, I have to draw on the board. You're like, yeah. And the guy said, it's like watching a TV series is what you're doing. You're just engaging and playing it. And like you even said with Clank, it sounds like even developing your own character like a video game.
Yeah, you're putting stickers on the board. You're ripping cards up. I mean, it's crazy. It's a unique experience, but it's a ton of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it makes you uncomfortable, good. You probably could learn something through that.
Exactly. There's a lesson to be learned there. Dig a little deeper, find out why.
There you go. But that's not the goal of our show today. No. But the digging a little deeper always is a theme for us. It's why not?
I'll gladly come back and talk about board games if you want.
Jumping back, even I think before you got into the gaming thing, you sort of mentioned you've always felt drawn to this idea of content creation. Thinking back, when did you sort of first feel like that's what you want to get into? That's what you want to do?
Well, when I was growing up, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'm not going to go back too far, but I was trying to figure out, I kind of fell into TV production. Mm-hmm. So I work full-time in television production right now. Been doing it for about 15 years or so. And I just kind of fell into it. I found that I liked it. It was the one thing I kind of enjoyed doing. And here I am. Along the way, probably mostly in the last, 3 to 5 years or so, I've developed my own, spin on how I like to do things. So I started buying my own equipment. I opened my own business back in 2023, Refocus Creative, where it's mostly, I do the same kind of thing, but a little more higher end. It's not as community based. It's more like commercial based. And so I do productions for different companies and run ads and marketing for people. So I kind of along the way have just continued to stumble into things and figure it out along the way. Always trying to focus on the creative, hence Refocus Creative. And Refocus Creative is the intentional name behind that is sort of reimagining who you are and refocusing your whole business or your whole existence, right? So like I shared with you a little bit in the beginning, like I've always been a sort of a deep thinker. I always want to have like more meaning to the things I do. And so my business is no different than that. I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here and I apologize, but
we embrace tangents around here.
Yeah. I think really to answer your question, like I've always wanted to create things for the Lord. Like obviously I'm a Christian. Being a creative and a Christian doesn't always go as smoothly together as one might think. I think when you grow up in the church, when you grow up a Christian, you think, okay, well, maybe I need to be a missionary. Maybe I need to be a pastor. It's just a normal thing to consider. Like, how am I going to serve the kingdom of God? How am I going to win souls? Right? Those are the things that go through your mind. And being a board game designer does not easily make sense to how you might win souls, right? So I think I struggled with that for a long time, trying to figure out how do I be this creative gaming nerd and then love people and tell them about Jesus. And I think I sort of found my answers and then I sort of didn't. I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like. But I think for me personally, I'm not good at talking to people about Jesus. Like I can and I will. But sometimes I'm worried about maybe I'm going to not know enough about maybe a challenging thing that they propose to me. I always just worry about that stuff. For me, creating something like a movie, a short film, or even a game with a theme can tell that story for me. It's a part of who I am, and it bleeds into what I create and opens a door for deeper conversation about that stuff. Like it's just sort of like, hey, here's what I think, and now let's talk about it. So it's always been there. It's always been on my heart to make. Plus, like honestly, I can say this. Maybe you can edit this part out if you don't like it, but I don't like a lot of Christian films. I don't like them. I think that a lot of them are just bad. And I'm not saying that the people who have made them haven't put their heart and soul into them, or don't really believe this is a good message. But there always is a lack of quality and a lack of, I don't even know who the audience is sometimes, right? Like they're certainly not for non-believers.
Okay. So when you say bad and lack of quality,
yeah,
I'm big about definitions because it's like,
sure,
I could think I know what you mean by that. But when you, when you're, because I understand that sentiment, but for you, what do those words mean?
Well, first of all, I think there's a stigma around Christian film and media in general, like that it's just going to be bad. Like video game movies are almost always bad, right? I'm a big video gamer. I could think of 2 video game movies that I liked. I think Christian media has the same stigma. I think that people just assume it's going to be bad. And oftentimes when I say bad, it's really typically too preachy. So it's really on the nose and it's not realistic. The characters, the struggles they're going through are either one extreme or another.
Right.
There's one movie, I won't mention the name, but it involves a couple cops. One's a Christian, one isn't. The Christian cop, the extent of his problems at home are like his 2 daughters fighting over a doll. The non-Christian cop has every problem under the sun going on in his life. He's an alcoholic. He's going through a divorce. His kids hate it. Like, that's not how it always is. Right. Some people who aren't Christians have a great life. And so it always bugs me when they have these extremes. Because like Christians have real problems too.
Right.
It's not just their kids fighting over a doll. Sometimes Christians have lost a child.
Oh, yeah.
Or like something devastating has happened in their life and they really have to question who God is, right? So a lot of Christian films don't ever really dig too deep in exploring some of that. They always go surface level. It's like person hits rock bottom, person goes to church, person hears a sermon, person is saved.
And everything goes up and to the right. Finds a job, finds a mate, gets...
Yeah, exactly. Now, I haven't seen every Christian movie that's ever been made.
Right.
But I think I'm gravitate, when I say bad, I shouldn't maybe say the word bad, but I think there's a lack of quality. Typically, the production value is really low.
Yeah.
The writing isn't always great. The acting isn't always great. And I think Christians really should be probably creating some of the best content because we have the best example of creation to look at. Yeah. And so God has put fine detail into creation, and we should too. We shouldn't just try to be making these cookie cutter movies.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it did. And I love what you just said about the sense of creation. And again, we were talking before we really got into the show about taste, because we love good food, and the idea of how many taste buds we have.
Right.
When food is basically to nourish our bodies, but God created us with, I don't even know how many. I didn't look it up. I'm guessing hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of taste bud receptors. Yep. That's only purpose is to help us delight in the food that we are
exactly.
eating.
Exactly. It has no value to the utility of the food. Right. It just is there to enjoy the food, and God didn't have to do that.
Right.
And it wouldn't have made no difference to us. He put it there specifically for us to enjoy.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I was saying before is like, you don't have to create this specific gospel message story in everything you do. So it's good if you do. Like the movie I'm working on is that.
Yeah.
But like the games I designed and some of the other films I've shot, they're not. They're just good movies that a family can watch without worrying about the content. It's maybe a little bit, I don't know, it could be a little bit of a heavy topic, but you're not going to have to fast forward it with your kids in the room or, mute it.
Right.
So that's kind of, I think you can do both and still have something that everyone can enjoy. Because I think when I say bad, non-believers are not going to watch the typical Christian movie.
Right.
And so it's nothing wrong with making a Christian movie for other Christians. That's fine. I struggle with it. That's all, as you can see. And I'm torn on the matter.
I don't think you're that torn. I think you're pretty clear on how you feel about it. But that's the same way I feel. And, I'll watch movies and it doesn't have to be a religious one. It could be a different political agenda or ideology. Sure. And it's like, I don't like to be preached to. Tell me a good story.
And that's a really good point. I don't want to demonize Christian films because, again, I think that people who make them really are pouring their true soul into it. They wanted to reach people. And so I often check myself and be like, let's dial it back, Chris. Let's not hate on someone's parade because they do it to me too. I'm not this genius creator. I just think that people could do better to pay attention to just some of the things that they're maybe doing that they don't need to do, or vice versa.
Yeah. Because as we also talked about, like, it takes a lot of work and effort to make even the trailer for a movie takes a lot of effort. Even a 1 minute commercial, like you were saying about your trip to Israel, where you've got 4 terabytes of data of content.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've got basically the trailer for what will one day be a work.
It's like a minute long. Not even, it's like 30 seconds long.
But that took probably several hours to craft that 1 minute video. And then you think about an hour and a half, 2 hour long movie. And just the editing of that is weeks, months.
Right.
And it's amazing to me that a movie ever gets made.
It's easy for me to sit here and say, they're not good. And I haven't created something that's made it to a theater yet, So I really want to make sure I am clear that I appreciate the effort. I just think that we owe it to ourselves, especially as Christians, to create with a higher standard and not just create with this cookie cutter formula because we're trying to say something. Like we can just make something that's good.
Yeah.
And that people will enjoy. That's okay.
Well,
I should have just said that instead of going on a 15-minute rant.
No, that's what I like. I said, I call it the leading of the Spirit.
Yes.
When you just, we're going on this tangent and that's okay. And we'll see where it leads.
It's very eloquently said. We'll go with that.
I wanted to go back to a comment that you said about how, Because I feel a very similar way. You said it, not that you're not comfortable talking about Jesus, but when I do, sometimes it feels almost too intimate to share. But I think in your stories, what you're saying is my experience of Jesus is like this, which I think is very similar to what Jesus frequently said in the stories. He would say is the kingdom of heaven is like this.
Right.
And I think that comes out, my guess is that would come out in the stories that you tell, the game, whether that's in the game or the films that you're making, is you're sort of saying my experience of Jesus is like this without. And so somebody who may not be a believer could say, oh, that's an interesting story.
Yeah.
And somebody who looks at these films with sort of the more kingdom oriented mindset would be like, oh, I see Jesus in that story.
Right. Yeah, I think ultimately my goal is not to leave it too open to interpretation. Like I personally want to be clear. Some movies that I create or some things that I create, I'm okay with leaving them open. But if I'm asked, like I'm always going to deliver what I wanted to be delivered in it, right? That's my answer. And I think, again, I've always just struggled with finding a good segue of even talking about Jesus. Like some people give you a great segue. Something horrible happened in their life and they're looking for answers.
Yeah.
You can pray with them. That's an easy segue. But if you're just having a normal I always envy the people who are telling me like, oh yeah, I sit on a plane, just start talking to my neighbor about Jesus. How? Right. I don't know how you do that. I'm introverted. Like I don't talk to anybody and people probably think I'm rude, but it's just because I don't really know what to say, But again, if asked, I would talk. But I think this is me giving a piece of my heart and saying, and I say this, I'm talking specifically about the film I'm working on now, which we'll probably talk about more later. But even just any project that I do is saying, here's my heart, here's what I think, and here's what I believe, and here's how I think we should treat each other. Right? If you watch my debut short film, The Bench, it's not a Christian film. In fact, it's actually heavily inspired by The Twilight Zone. Which I love. Yeah. But the character in it, one of the main characters could be seen as a Jesus character or an angel or something like that. Or some other religion, perhaps, that you could recognize another deity. And, I don't know. But I think my point is like, I think my point has been made. I just think for me, it's easier to open a door and say, hey, this is who I am. Now, what questions do you have? I'm happy to talk to you about this. That's what I hope will happen from the things that I create.
Yeah. And I think that's a good approach. Because, and I think it was, Dallas Willard or Henry Now, and I don't ever remember where these quotes come from. They just rattle around in my head. But this idea that answers before questions do a great damage. And if you're, like you were just saying, if somebody's coming to you, asking you, basically, whether they're clearly asking you or if you offer to pray with them, even praying with them is not really offering an answer.
Right.
Or telling them what they should do or what they should think or what they believe. And in my past, my history with friends and with people, I've seen that where I was like, oh, I'll tell them something and I'll come back with something. They're going through something and I'm offering answers before they're even asking questions.
Right.
And damaging that relationship because I'm jumping the gun.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people just don't want answers. They just want to be heard.
Right. They just want to gripe.
And I think Jesus is an example of that. Honestly, I always think about this story. I'll just tell you this really quick because it's sort of relevant. The story where the rich man comes to Jesus and says, what must I do to follow you? And Jesus says, well, sell everything that you have and then come follow me. And the guy gets all upset and leaves. And that's the end of the story. You think, well, what's so significant about that? I mean, we get it. He told him to sell everything. What's so significant to me is that Jesus didn't chase after the guy. Right. And say, wait, did you hear what I said? I told you to sell everything. Go sell everything. Like he told him what was required of him.
Just sell a couch and see how that feels.
Right. But like he just told him what he needed to do.
Yeah.
He didn't force him to do it. He didn't require him to convert. He told him, if you would like to follow me, here's what you have to do. Now go and do it or not. I kind of think that's kind of what, I don't know. That's my sort of approach to people is like, I think it's easy to think, well, I gotta get this person to hear what I have to say. They have to hear and they have to believe. I have to say the right thing. It isn't really about us. I think we're just supposed to be vessels of the gospel, lead by example, and let God do the converting.
Right.
Like we can't change someone's heart.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to get into that.
No, I love that. It's not about us, because so much time we think, oh, I have to have this perfect conversation with my daughter or with this friend of mine or with this person. And it's like, dude, it's not about you.
Yeah. Seek pastoral guidance. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a theologian. I don't have a degree in MDiv or anything like that. But
well, the other thing, to go back to the guy, the rich young ruler, as they call him, who comes asking, as he walked away, it says Jesus loved him.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, I don't know why. Like we asked this, we I think in the content creation world, we use our imagination a lot. But this idea that he's a seeker. He's a guy asking questions. And just because he gets a hard answer that he doesn't jumped on, doesn't mean that the seed hasn't been planted and he's not walking away considering that.
Exactly.
And it's like you said, it's not our job to, walk with them through the entire conversion stage or through the trauma, whatever it is. It's like, hey, I offered you the seed that I had. I'm going to trust God to do with it what he wants to do.
And think, just like any father or parental figure like Jesus was in that moment, think of any lesson you were told that you just went right along with. It didn't hurt to hear. Any truth you've been told about yourself, I'm sure none of us initially, oh yeah, sounds like a great idea. We all walk away sad and angry and thinking, I don't want to do this. And you're right. You bring up a really good point. We don't know what happens to him afterwards. Who's to say? Maybe I'll make a short film about it.
Oh, yeah, there you go. That'd be fun. Well, and, I think of the times when I've been reacting a certain way with my children.
Yeah.
And my wife will call me out and be like, you're being a little harsh. Maybe you need to dial it back a little bit. Do I say, wow, honey, I'm so glad you told me that. I'm so thankful for you.
You should. You should say that.
I should, but it takes a few minutes, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Because what I do is like,
Nobody wants to hear that.
It's a gift for me to walk away. Because that's not what I want to do either. Yeah. But to be able to walk away, to not respond to her, but to think about it. Like, I think she has a point. I don't want to hear it. I think she's right. And I need to engage differently with my children or with this person. And it never feels good in the moment.
No, exactly. But I think you raise a good point. I think we don't know. And we also don't know, there's a reason that story is in the Bible. And I think there's a lot of takeaways you can take from that story, as we have already started to unpack.
Right. So interested now. Yeah. Let's put it on the list of next projects for you to work on.
Yeah. We'll be doing this again, I'm sure. I'll come back with I'll come back with like a seminary degree though.
So that you can, we're not going to, we won't go down that road.
No, that's not.
So I do want to go into the road of the project that you are working on.
Sure.
So we talked about the possibility, the potential of unpleasant Christian-based, Christian-labeled. So we talked earlier about the unpleasant Christian-labeled media and why that sort of grates. My guess is you don't have those same complaints about the show The Chosen. And so what is it about The Chosen that kind of brings your heart to life and doesn't get that label of this is bad?
Yeah. I think some of the Christian films that I appreciate, and I mentioned a couple to you, like some of my favorite Christian films are Machine Gun Preacher, The Book of Eli, which people are like, those aren't Christian movies. They're not really. They're movies about Christianity, I guess, or about faith. The Passion of the Christ, one of my favorite movies. I don't know if you've seen it. Very controversial when it came out.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It was too violent. But I think that's where I land, is like, are we going to show the real story of the Bible, or or are we not? Because the Bible, if you read it, was pretty rough book. Like,
Bible's not boring.
No. And like some things in the Old Testament I'm reading, I'm just like, wow, that's that's crazy. Right.
Yes.
So it was a very violent book, or time, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And God had to, deal with some pretty rough people. So I think it's good and should show the dark side of humanity, because people are wicked. Mm-hmm. We're all wicked, right? So like, if you show someone who's unbelievable, not relatable, again, it's going to be right over their head.
Yeah.
Show someone like me, right? So like the Book of Eli, I mean, it's probably not a great example because it's a post-apocalyptic film, but let's take Machine Gun Preacher. I don't know, have you seen Machine Gun Preacher?
Not that I know of.
Okay. It's a movie. It's a true story about, I forget his name. I think his name is Sam Childs. He was a depraved guy, just vile, in and out of prison, almost killed a guy, like violent biker dude, right? Gets saved, just totally radically saved. Ends up going over to, I think, Uganda to fight the terrorists there, basically, that were kidnapping children and forcing them into war. And he kills them. He shoots them. He kills them. He picks up an AK-47 and fights back, because they're literally bringing war to these villages, and he fights back. And it's a great film. I highly, highly recommend it, because it shows this guy who came from this horrible life, gave his life to the Lord, but then still struggles. Like, one of his friends is still kind of like in and out of like rehab, and he's trying to help him. His church he's got a church of his own. He's trying to get his congregation like around what he's doing. He's struggling with people like who don't believe in his cause. Like, he's dealing with a lot of things that look like God's just not God's hand's not in it at all. I think it just shows a true struggling relationship, right? And it doesn't shy away from the violence. It doesn't shy away from the dark part of life that ultimately, hopefully, will lead you to Jesus. And so The Chosen specifically, I think, first of all, I think The Chosen is the best Christian media that we have to date. I do. I mean that. It's not perfect. I think it has a few issues that people criticize. I think some of the criticisms are easily, debated.
Yeah.
But I do think that the quality is top notch. I mean, the first couple seasons we're still wrestling with budget constraints, but seasons 3 and 4 have just absolutely blown me away. I mean, we're talking, they went from like a $10 million budget on the first film. It's actually the highest Christian, I think it's the highest crowdfunded Christian show of all time.
Wow.
And then they're up now, like, I think season 5 was like $48 million. So they've come a long way.
You can do a lot more things with that money.
You can.
I mean,
and what's crazy is a lot of their funding comes directly from the viewer. They do have some backing, but a lot of people, any merch that you buy goes right to them. Anyway, I could go on about that a lot, but I think for me, The Chosen really captures what it might have been like for Jesus to interact with his followers and the people around him. It takes liberties. There's no doubt about it. Not everything in The Chosen is in the Bible. And sometimes little bits of dialogue that Jesus may have said are slightly changed for the context of the show. My personal opinion, people are all bent out of shape about that. My personal opinion is, does it drive you away from the truth? And if the answer is no, for me, it drew me closer. I mean, when I started watching the show, I just wanted to understand the Bible more. I wanted to go back, and you know what? A lot of stuff I didn't know. I would see it in the show, and I'd be like, "Oh, there's no way that's in the Bible," and it was.
Right.
Like, honestly, it was mind blowing. So I learned a lot, and to go back to Passion of the Christ too. Like, I do enjoy. I appreciate. I shouldn't say enjoy. It's not a movie you watch with popcorn and soda. When I say enjoy, I appreciate that movie. I mean, people get so upset that it's violent. I remember when I was younger, I called the theater to find out show times, and it was like, this movie is rated R for excessive violence. And like, no other movie said that. It was just this movie.
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's 2 hours of torture. Yeah, it was a crucifixion. Like, do you know what that was? Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
And so I just think, like, let's either be real or let's not. Like, let's not pretend that it wasn't this violent, because you're going to lose. I think you're going to lose respect of viewers.
Right.
Not every minute detail might be spot on, but it's probably pretty close. You weren't there.
Right.
But the Romans were brutal, and they knew how to kill people. So I think I think that and the Chosen, they add an element of realism. And Jesus in the show, I don't know if you've watched The Chosen. Have you seen The Chosen? There's just such an authentic and normal relationship. He's a friend to these people. He's a brother. And he's normal. He eats. He gets tired. He plays games with his disciples. And people are like, well, this is heretical. It's like John specifically says in the book of, I may be getting it wrong, but I'm pretty sure John is the one who says if we wrote down everything that Jesus did, it wouldn't fit in this book.
Right.
So we already know that Jesus did way more than we know he did. Why couldn't he have played hacky sack with his disciples? Like,
right.
What's so wrong with that? Why is that bad? But people find the littlest things to get mad about. And so that's sort of a roundabout way of me saying, I think the show has achieved a lot, for Christian media. And I just was inspired by it. Like, I love the creator, Dallas Jenkins. I think when I listen to him talk, I relate to a lot of the things that he says. It feels like he's talking to me. And so I'm like, man, this guy, I wish him and I were bros and we would hang out. Right. I had a chance to meet him, which was great, but it was very brief. I just think what he's doing, it aligns with my vision, right? The way he talks, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And so I just, because of that, grew even more attached to The Chosen. And he actually made a short film for his church called The Shepherd that ultimately went viral and led to him creating The Chosen. So I was like, hey, maybe I could do something like that.
Yeah.
Why not? So that's kind of where I'm at. And I hope that answers your question. I know that was kind of another rant, but I'm very passionate about this stuff. You couldn't tell already.
Well, and I think that's what makes interesting conversations is when you tap into something that somebody's super passionate about, they care about deeply. And, man, I wrote down a couple of notes as you were talking, because I was just like, wow, that's an awesome concept. Like, one is how religion, I separate religion from Christianity, because religion is sort of the human construct. They've sanitized Jesus. And to your point, sanitize the Bible, like crazy stories, crazy violence. In talking about the Passion of the Christ, how actually watching it helps me realize what actually happened. Like you see, Peter talked, or Paul wrote about all his things about he was stoned, he was flogged, he was this and that. And we just sort of skimmed through it as like a resume. Yeah. Without picturing the fact that, like, they threw stones at him until they thought he was dead.
Right.
And that's just one of the things, the flogging, what is it? 40 minus 1, the 39 lashes.
Yeah.
And I didn't like getting spanked when I was young. We're not going to talk about spanking and stuff, but like, I didn't like getting hit once with a rod on my butt. Right there, because he says I was beaten with rods. And that takes me to the other thing I wrote, of that idea of, are we going to reflect what's real? And that's what bugs me about movies now is you watch something, you're like, nobody talks like that.
Right.
Nobody is like inherently evil, like just desires to take over the world for evil's sake sort of thing. Like so many bad guys are so poorly written.
Yep.
And like you said, the good guys are like, oh, there's pure as snow and all this stuff. You're like, nobody's like that.
Exactly.
The last thing I wrote down was like that idea that you said about The Chosen is, where does it lead you? Like Jesus would say, what's the fruit? Does the fruit draw you closer, or does it drive you away? Does it want to make you know me more? Or does it say, this guy is a jerk?
Yep.
But we get so caught up in the details that we miss the whole point.
Exactly. And I think that that's just I don't want to get into it because I'm not qualified to speak on it, but I just think that I've heard people criticize the show for it pointing people toward a fictional Jesus. And I can understand if you were to really rip it apart, how you're getting to that conclusion, but I couldn't disagree more. You know, I was at ChosenCon, which was a conference about Chosen, and Dallas, I think it was Dallas, was sharing about how he felt prayerfully in his heart before the Chosen was even made that characters he would create would soon be the faces people picture when they think about God. And he felt like that God said that to him. And you know something? It's true. It's a little weird when Jonathan Rumi, the actor who plays Jesus, is walking around Rome and everyone's like, Jesus. Like, he doesn't like it. He's a devout Catholic. But is it wrong to picture a face when you're thinking about Jesus? I don't know. But is it going to send you to hell? Probably not.
Right.
You know, I think if it's not taking you away, I think honestly, people need to be on their own pursuing truth, right? So like if you watch The Chosen and you just take it at face value and you never question anything in the show and you don't go to the Bible to look for it yourself, well, that's on you. Right. I think you have to be willing to say, oh, I want to look into this a little deeper, which is what I did. If you're not going to do that, then I think you're going to find easy criticism and low hanging fruit, so to speak, for that easy criticism. So anyway, yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
No, because I completely agree. I had a friend of mine. He said, "Watch the Chosen. Don't watch the Chosen. Just watch the first episode."
Yeah,
and so you watch the first episode, and then you're like, "Oh, this is really cool."
Yeah,
and you go into that because even that idea of the sanitized Jesus, like it says, and Jesus went from this place to this place, and we think that's a 5-minute walk.
Exactly.
You're like, no, this is like a 3-day journey.
Yeah.
And it doesn't tell you anything of what happened in between.
Exactly.
But
there's a lot of time with these people spent together.
Yes.
A lot of time.
And I think about spending time with my friends. If we did a 3-day hike.
Yeah.
Sitting around the fire.
These people were
probably
friends.
Telling fart jokes.
Yeah, exactly. They were friends. They were friends. They had a real relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's what the show captures so well. Jesus was a real person.
Yeah.
Is a real person.
Yeah.
But it was flesh on earth. He hung out with fishermen. Like fishermen were like the truck drivers of our day. Right? Like they weren't good dudes, probably. They probably swore. They probably smelled bad.
Yeah.
They weren't like good temple going boys.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so, and again, tax collectors, like I think about this a lot. The show touches upon tax. They were hated.
Yes.
Hated.
They have turned their back on the Jewish society.
Yeah. When you read the Bible, it's like, oh, Matthew was a tax collector. Okay. What does that mean?
My dad's an accountant. So the same thing.
Yeah.
No.
But back then, they were like traitors to their people. So like, that to me just resonated really deep. And it was like, wow, there's some real, I think, value here to like really deeper understanding. And Dallas, the creator, he consults with a rabbi, a pastor, a Catholic priest. Like he's talking to all different people who can bring perspective. And so he's not just going in there writing a script and throwing it on the screen.
Right.
I mean, he's really digging into who these people were, their culture. And I can tell you right now, having been to Israel, I know why God chose Jewish people to be there. They have the best culture in the world as far as I'm concerned. They're so awesome. I loved being over there. It was great, but that's the story for another time.
That's a rabbit. We're going to put a pin in that one for another conversation. Well, and you mentioned Matthew the tax collector being basically on one end of the spectrum of Jewish society. Because on the other, you have Simon the Zealot.
Yeah.
Who is basically a Jewish terrorist back then.
Exactly. Yeah.
And for Jesus to call those two dudes to be in the same small group of closest disciples.
Yeah.
I could probably think of some modern day right-wing extremist, left-wing extremist, and then these guys are brought in to be close friends.
Yeah.
And so that would be probably the closest picture we could have these days. And I'm not going to touch that powder keg any closer?
Put a pin in that one too. A big old pin.
We're going to go bury that like it's toxic waste.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, that's, again, going back to when I watched it, I was like, that's the Jesus that I know.
Mm-hmm.
It reflected my experience of who I've come to know Jesus to be. And it's actually made me love Jesus more. Mm-hmm. Anything that, again, you'll know them by their fruit. Mm-hmm. What's the fruit? And for you, one of the fruit of The Chosen was to this inspiration to go deeper with one of the stories in the gospel. Mm-hmm. So tell us about Shema. I'm trying to say it right.
Shema. So Shema is the Hebrew word for listen, or listen and do. In fact, Shema, O Israel, is a prayer that is prayed, I believe, 3 times a day in Israel. And so it's listen, O Israel. It's a beautiful prayer. If you ever get it, actually, if you look at the teaser trailer for Shema, you can hear the prayer. There's a song I used in the trailer that is the actual prayer of Shema. And really just, taking inspiration from The Chosen. It's funny. One of my friends joked and she said, it's inspired by the Bible, really, not like touche. But yes, it is inspired by the Bible. But when I say inspired by The Chosen, I love that The Chosen takes some of those fringe people that we don't know too much about, and it gives them a backstory. It gives them more depth, and it adds realism to the world. It's all fiction. For the most part, but we can just go with context and culture and just make it up, and that's okay. So I did that with Shema. Shema is going to be about a 30-minute film, give or take, and it's going to follow the story of Malchus. Malchus is mentioned by name in the Gospel of John, and in the Gospel of Luke, it's mentioned that his ear is cut off by Peter during the arresting of Jesus. So Peter actually attacks this man, cuts off his ear, and Jesus heals the ear completely. And I've always loved the story. That's all we know. There's no other explanation of this incident. In fact, it's weird because Luke is the only one who mentions it, and Luke wasn't even there. So it's a really interesting. I learned a lot just from writing that one scene, let alone the script. Okay,
yeah.
The arresting scene is the first scene in the film, and it takes place right as Judas is bringing the temple guards back to the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's going to end right as Jesus is arrested, basically. So it's probably like a 5-minute scene or so, 6-minute scene, but there's a lot happening there. And there's a lot of emotion and a lot of hopefully lessons to be learned. But the story is going to follow Malchus in the very fictional 3 days, or two days really, that follow this healing. It's going to take place Friday to Sunday, loosely. It's a short film, so we had to take some liberties there.
Yeah.
But he's going to have to reconcile, he's going to struggle a lot with, this man I just went to arrest healed me, and there was nothing after that. He didn't ask me for my name. He didn't talk to me about my conversion. He didn't ask me any questions. He just left, and now he's dead. Malchus finds out very quickly that Jesus was crucified, and is like, well, now what? Now I've even got even more guilt, right? It's not just I went to arrest him. Now they killed him. And so it's a story about fear, being fearful of what's going to happen next. It's a story about redemption and trust in a way, and really just reconciling with what we all do is kind of that guilt of how do we ever repay Jesus for what he's done? And Malchus doesn't have closure. He just was healed and left there, and now he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. He's got all these unanswered questions. And so I don't know, I fell in love with, I've always loved that story. It's just, to me, and when you read it again and again, when I'm writing the script, I have the story right there, all 4 gospels of it, but you read it again, you're like, man, really nothing happened after that, according to what we have in the text. There are inspirations I'm taking from other non-canonical gospels. Okay.
Cool.
The Gospel of Hebrews, if you will. Yeah. These never made it into the Holy Bible. And so I don't claim that they have any truth to them or any kind of study around, but the script is written based off of the 4 gospels. It's also written off of rumors, like from these other gospels, that maybe there's some stories that say maybe Malchus did actually, I don't want to spoil anything, but there were some things I used. Okay. I almost spoiled it. There's some things that maybe happened that I put in the script as well. I just took some liberties in there and created a little more backstory to Malchus. We have no idea who this guy was. In fact, I couldn't find any any research about what a temple servant even did, or what kind of context. Like, I didn't know if it was a good position to be in or a bad position. Some versions call him a slave. Malchus was a slave, but he was the servant to the high priest at the time. So probably a lowly position. So I don't know much about that position. And I asked people of that faith. And I tried the best I could to create this character as authentically as possible. But ultimately what came down to me, came to the ultimate conclusion was like, what's important is this message of the film and getting it done. I'm not going to get lost too much in the weeds of culture and diversity. Like, I wanted to get a really diverse cast. I tried my best, and I'm doing the best I can with that. But really, what it comes down to is like getting this film done, because it's just going to get done. And I'm the type of person that I'm a perfectionist. But perfection is the enemy of progress, and I'll never get it done if I wait until every I is dotted and every T is crossed. So I'm really happy with how far we've come. Most of the main cast is locked in. We're casting a few extras next month, actually March. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but March 12th, I travel to Texas. I'm going down to Capernam Studios, where they actually filmed The Chosen. There's a movie set down there that is a Christian movie set. They have a first century village. And I'm going to have the whole set to myself for 12 hours. We're going to shoot 2 scenes from the film while we're there, with the main character and another character. And then we're going to finish the film this June right here in Massachusetts. So I'm going to make Massachusetts look like Israel AD 33 somehow. And hoping people will suspend some disbelief, because knowing it's a short film. But I've been to Israel. Some parts look like desolate wastelands. Some look like the mountains of Maine. So it's a beautiful country. And so I think I can get away with it a little bit. That's the general premise of it. And, I really hope that it pays homage to The Chosen. That's really the goal. It is at its core. Jesus is in it, has a small role, but it's a story about who Jesus is and how he impacted and related to the people that he met. So yes, it's about Malchus, but it really is. I'm hoping I hope the film turns out to reveal who Jesus is. And, it's a very obvious Christian film with an even more obvious Christian message. But I think I really want people to go check out. I hope people check out The Chosen from seeing this. And I hope it inspires other Christian creators to think outside the box when they're making films about the gospel, like we were talking about way early on. Like, I want people to think creatively and not just we have to stick to the Bible story exactly. Like, it's okay to imagine a little bit, as long as it's not going to steer people away from the truth. And I think I accomplished that with the script. So I wrote it. I'm going to be shooting it myself. I have a few crew members, but we're doing this all on a real shoestring budget. And everybody that's been a part of it has been amazing so far. Like, I've got people, just doors are flying open on a level that I've never would have expected. And I'm having to tell people like, hey, I might be all set now. Like, I don't need any more help.
Nice.
So that's a really amazing thing to experience, because I definitely I don't deserve that. And I didn't expect that. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but that gets people up to speed with what's happening. And, I'm really excited about it. So that's awesome. You want to learn more, you can check out refocuscreative.com/Shema, SHEMA. That's where you can read a little blurb about what I just talked about. We're also doing a Kickstarter. I don't know if you want, I can plug that. Is that okay if I share that?
For sure.
Yeah, we're hoping to do a small Kickstarter, which is just some crowdfunding to raise a little bit of money to help offset some of the costs, because it gets expensive. Not a ton of money. So that's going to hopefully launch in March 4th. But you can follow the page now. If you go to Kickstarter and search Shema, you can follow the page. I actually highly recommend doing that, because it really helps us out a lot. So.
Yeah, and I'll provide the links in the show notes.
Thank you.
And all that. So yeah, definitely.
Thanks for letting me go off about that. I appreciate it.
For sure. So one of the things I'm really excited about seeing this project, Chris, is that story of Malchus in the garden several years ago, that as I was reading it, it really struck to me, like, we look at Peter and how he went to deny Jesus.
Right.
And we think, oh, what a jerk. How could he do that?
Right.
If you look at what has happened along the way, you see, Peter in saying, oh, I'll never deny you. Even before that, you can't wash my feet. And then, oh, wash all of me. And it's just like that night, Jesus is just like, Peter, you're not getting it.
Yeah.
And then even here, Peter's, you guys couldn't stay awake. So that insecurity that Peter must have been feeling that led to this moment where he cut off Malchus' ear. And then you go to the courtyard, and the third person to ask him, don't you know him, is the relative of Malchus.
That's right.
And I'm just like, holy crap, reminding Peter of all you're not getting it right. You don't know what's going on. Like Peter must be in such inner turmoil through that night. And Malchus is a part of it. So I'm super interested to see where the story goes and how you weave that in. And like,
well, not to disappoint you, but I did actually have that relative in the script for a little while.
You cut them out though?
I did cut them out. I cut them out for a couple of different reasons. It was to make room for, I think, a character that I think will add a little more value to the script and the story. And I didn't want to overload the script with too many characters. And that character I had written him as Malchus's cousin in the script, and I had him being present at the arrest scene so he could later speak to, Peter's denial. But I ultimately ended up getting rid of that because it just felt very similar. It felt too redundant to have a character kind of almost similarly going through something that Malchus was going through. And so I'm sorry to say that is not in the film, but hey, here's a little Easter egg that nobody else knows yet.
There you go.
Except the people who were part of it originally. So now you and your viewers know.
A little behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So again, go check out the Kickstarter. It's ongoing when this is going to air. The link is in the show notes. It'll be on the website. Go check out Refocus Creative. Again, all these links will be available for you guys. And, check it out when it comes out. At the very least, watch it when it comes out, especially if you like The Chosen. Check this out. So I can't say check this out any more frequently than I did without.
Yeah. And the best way to probably do that is just to, go to refocuscreative.com/Shema. There's a mailing list at the bottom. You can sign up to just get notified. I can get on the mailing list. I'll let you know when it's out. You can also just follow Refocus Creative social media. Also, there's a Shema short film Instagram and TikTok, which are not as populated as I'd like them to be, but if you go out there, I'll definitely be sharing it when the time comes. Probably, I'm hoping for a release sometime fall of 2025, late fall, maybe end of the year is what I'm shooting for, if not sooner. So it's all going to depend on how the crowdfunding does and how we do on editing and all that.
As you mentioned, you're kind of a one-man band, so depends on that 4-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
She'll be 4 by then.
I've bitten off a huge chunk here with a 30-minute short film. My last one was 12 minutes, and that took me about 2 weeks to edit.
Yeah.
So, we'll see how this goes.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Chris, thank you for coming on, talking not just about Shema, but all your stories and the meanderings of the conversation has been really fun and awesome. And I hope the listeners enjoyed it, but to a degree, I don't even care because I've enjoyed it. So
thank you, Paul. It was really great to be here. I appreciate the conversation and thank you for the opportunity.
All right. So check out Chris Bowden and Refocus Creative. Again, all the links will be available. And I said, check it out again. So I've reached my limit.
Check it out.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Chris Bowden, not talking about a movie that's currently out, but really ended up talking about Shema, which will come out later this year. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?